Hey guys, tonight we are stripping away the comfy layers of your modern existence and tossing you, perhaps quite unceremoniously, into the scorching, sandy reality of ancient Egypt. Imagine this with me for a second. You wake up not to the gentle hum of an air conditioner or the cheerful chirping of birds, but to a blinding white light slicing through woven reeds or rough mud brick. Before your eyes have even adjusted, before you've even processed the fact that you don't recognize your surroundings, the heat hits you. Not just a warm breeze, but a thick physical presence, like stepping into an oven that's been on all night. The air is bone dry, sucking moisture from your lungs with every breath. Dust motes dance in the sunbeams, pouring through cracks, a constant reminder of the sand that stretches for miles in every direction outside these walls. There's no cool side of the pillow, just radiating warmth. Your clothes, if you even have any on, probably just simple rough linen, feel sticky against your skin almost instantly. You can feel the grit on your teeth, left over from just breathing in this arid atmosphere. You are hot. You are parched. You are, to be brutally honest, probably already well on your way to a severe case of heat stroke, and it's barely past sunrise. Sorry, but let's just say the odds of you making it through your first day, armed only with your modern sensibilities and total lack of adaptation, are slim to none. Consider this your first, perhaps most immediate reality check. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, seriously curious where you're tuning in from and what time it is right now. Let me know in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. All right, settle in, but maybe don't get too comfortable because we're heading straight into the single most unavoidable fact of life in ancient Egypt, the absolute relentless, oppressive, soul-draining heat. And the sun. Oh, the sun. Think the worst heat wave you've ever experienced? Multiply it by 10, remove all shade trees, cold drinks, air-conditioned buildings, and apply sunscreen, just to have it sweat off in 5 minutes. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Your modern temperature-regulated body is utterly unprepared for this level of sustained, high-intensity heat. You feel the sweat pooling instantly. It doesn't really cool you because the air is so dry and hot. It just collects. Everything feels too bright, too intense. Even just thinking feels like a chore in this thermal assault. You're squinting constantly, eyes aching from the glare reflecting off sand and dust. Your lips start to crack within hours if you're not careful. Headaches become your new best friend, pounding behind your temples with every minute spent exposed. One mainstream historical fact that really underscores how crucial water management was in this environment is the absolute dependency on the Nile's annual inundation. This isn't just a river, it is life here. Without the annual flood bringing silt and water to replenish the soil along its banks, agriculture, the very foundation of their civilization, would simply be impossible. Everything you eat, every beer you might eventually drink, every bit of papyrus they wrote on, ultimately relied on this yearly natural event, happening on the edge of this vast, unusable desert wasteland. They measured the year by its cycles, inundation, growing, and harvest. Because outside that narrow ribbon of fertile land along the Nile, it's just heat and sand forever. It makes your stroll across a hot beach feel like a walk in the park. Speaking of trying to cope, a slightly quirkier tidbit, Egyptians, particularly during the hotter months, often chose to sleep on their rooftops. I know it sounds potentially hazardous. Maybe roll over one too many times after a heavy night of fermented goods. But it offered a small respite from the accumulated heat, trapped within the mud brick walls below. You'd haul up your straw mat, your thin linen blanket, maybe your clay pillow, and hope for any whisper of a breeze. Imagine waking up under the stars, which sounds romantic, until you remember the heat hasn't really gone away. It's just dropped a few degrees and you're covered in a fine layer of dust blown around overnight. Plus, potential scorpion issues. Yeah, let's add scorpions to the list later. Fun times. Your body starts showing signs of distress almost immediately. Nausea as common fatigue is overwhelming. Forget that post-lunch slump. You're in a constant full body slump just trying to exist. If you try to do any kind of physical labor in the direct sun, which, spoiler alert, you absolutely would have to do if you weren't royalty or scribes or maybe highly skilled craftsmen, you'd be in serious trouble very fast. You wouldn't have electrolyte drinks or conveniently chilled bottled water. Rehydrating safely and effectively was a major challenge, which we'll get into. For now, just understand that basic thermal regulation is failing you. You feel sticky, itchy, uncomfortable, and profoundly dehydrated. Your modern sunblock useless in this intensity and humidity scattered sweat combo. And if you didn't manage to acquire or produce any kind of head covering scalp, burn is likely within a single day. This isn't just feeling warm. This is your body actively revolting against the conditions. It's enough to make you miss the gentle hum of your office building's questionable HVAC system. Historians still argue whether specific architectural features like rooftop vents or internal courtyards were truly effective cooling methods for the average home or just for the wealthy. The simple mud brick dwelling of most Egyptians was effective at staying cooler initially but retained heat for a long time, making rooftops look pretty inviting despite the risks. Consider also the pests attracted by the heat and whatever meager food or water sources are around. Swarms of flies buzzing incessantly around your face, landing on your skin, your lips, your eyes. No screens, no bug spray, just flies. Billions of them sharing your miserable experience. It's enough to drive anyone a little mad, constantly swatting, constantly annoyed. You quickly understand why certain animals like cats. Mifflin, I'm looking at you. Please keep the bugs away gained religious significance. Maybe it was less sacred. More a please for the love of the gods, eat the millions of mice and roaches this climate breeds. The reality is without access to constantly replenished cool water, knowing where to find adequate shade at the right time of day, understanding the body's need for salt replacement, and where to get salt. And simply being born and raised in these conditions to adapt your physiology, you would be incapacitated very quickly. Heat exhaustion turns to heat stroke frighteningly fast. Vomiting, dizziness, confusion, collapse. The cheerful image of you exploring ancient temples might look cool on Instagram, but the actual you would be lying face down in the dust somewhere, wondering where you went wrong. Which, let's be fair, was deciding to transport your soft, climate-controlled self to ancient Egypt without a manual and several dozen crates of Gatorade. Good luck with that first hour, buddy. Your skin already feels tight. All right, you've survived the crushing, relentless heat for a little while somehow. You're drenched in sweat that isn't even cooling you anymore. You're dizzy, your tongue feels like sandpaper glued to the roof of your mouth. And the only thing you can think about? The only thing is getting something, anything liquid into your body. You've remembered reading about the Nile, the lifeblood, the grand river. Relief, salvation. Just stumble your way there, scoop up a handful of cool water, and everything will be fine. Yeah, no. Here's your next, perhaps even more immediate existential threat. The very thing that makes life possible in Egypt is also trying its absolute best to kill you. That sparkling, or maybe not so sparkling, let's be honest, water flowing majestically is teeming. Absolutely teeming. Think of everything you've ever been told not to drink and assume it's concentrated and floating around in this ancient lifeline. Agricultural runoff, check. Animal waste from every creature sharing the riverbanks or, living in the river. Oh, definitely check. And unfortunately, yes, human waste as well. There were no modern sewage treatment plants in case that wasn't obvious. Waste went wherever it went, often back into the river. So imagine leaning down to take that desperately needed gulp. It probably doesn't look crystal clear. Maybe it has a slight, not so fresh smell. There might be debris floating. Little things you try not to see. Your instinct screams danger because your modern brain knows this is a one-way ticket to Agony Town. But you're so thirsty. Do you risk it? Your body screaming for hydration says yes. Your inner germaphobe crying hysterically in the corner of your consciousness says absolutely not. And if you give in to the thirst and cup your hands for a drink, Welcome to your likely fate. Drinking directly from the Nile, or frankly from any stagnant or improperly stored water source, was a gamble every single time. You weren't just quenching your thirst, you were inviting in a cocktail of bacteria, viruses, and perhaps worst of all, parasites. Dysentery, often called the bloody flux, was endemic. It's horrific. Severe diarrhea fever, intense abdominal pain, and rapid dehydration. The very problem you were trying to solve, it weakens you, makes you vulnerable, and honestly, it's just a profoundly miserable way to spend your rapidly dwindling time in the ancient world. Trying to find privacy in an ancient Egyptian village while suffering from dysentery sounds like its own special layer of historical suffering. Let's just say modern plumbing would feel like the greatest luxury on earth right about now. A huge mainstream historical fact is how Egyptians managed this to some extent. They drank a lot of beer. And I don't mean like a Saturday night binge. I mean beer was a staple consumed daily by adults and children alike. Before you imagine ancient Egyptians stumbling around drunk all the time, this beer was often weak thick. Sometimes you had to drink it through a straw to avoid the dregs, and more like a nutritious liquid bread. The brewing process involved boiling water, which conveniently killed off most of the nasty pathogens that thrived in raw water. So, while not purely sterile by our standards, it was significantly safer to drink than straight river water. In fact, beer and sometimes wine were often preferred for exactly this reason. It's funny to think the safest drink available for hydration was essentially a low alcohol brew, making "Can I get a beer?" less about partying and more about basic survival. Cheers to avoiding the cholera, I guess. Beyond immediate gastrointestinal distress, a common and truly insidious issue was parasites. Schistosomiasis, or bilharzia, caused by flatworms flukes whose larvae live in freshwater snails, was incredibly prevalent. The larvae would burrow into your skin just from wading in infected water. Maybe you were helping in the fields near the river or just washing up a bit. They then travel through your bloodstream and mature, settling in veins around your bladder or intestines, causing chronic inflammation, pain, anemia, and long-term organ damage. It was so common that symptoms consistent with it appear in ancient medical texts, and modern analyses of mummies frequently show signs of the disease. There was no cure back then. So, congratulations, that dip in the Nile on a hot day, or that quick wash near the banks might just give you a lifelong, debilitating illness. Imagine trying to build a pyramid while suffering chronic parasitic infections. Here's a slightly quirkier tidbit. While they lacked our understanding of germ theory, the Egyptians did recognize some link between environmental conditions and disease. There's evidence of attempts to purify water for the very elite, perhaps allowing sediment to settle or straining it through cloth. Methods that offer some minimal improvement but are nowhere near effective enough against microscopic threats. The poor just had to chance it with the nearest water source unless they could access beer rations. Some ancient Egyptian medical papyri contain incantations and remedies aimed at expelling worms or relieving fluk, though their effectiveness by modern standards was highly dubious. Honey, which has antibacterial properties, appears frequently in remedies, perhaps accidentally providing some benefit among a lot of ineffective ingredients or magical spells. Eye infections were also rampant. Sandust flies. Remember those lovely creatures from the heat section buzzing right into your face? And contaminated water used for washing often led to conjunctivitis, trichomai, which could cause blindness and other painful conditions. Your eyes would constantly be irritated red, perhaps oozing. Not a great look nor conducive to, seeing where you're going as you try to navigate this dangerous world. Blindness was far more common than it is today. Try pouring water over your eyes to clean them in ancient Egypt, and you might just make things worse. Talk about a catch-22. Historians still argue whether certain deities or rituals related to the Nile were partly rooted in a dawning pre-scientific understanding of its capacity for both giving life and causing illness. Did venerating Hapi, the god of the Nile's inundation, or Sekhmet, the goddess of plague and healing, reflect an awareness of the river's dual nature? Or were these beliefs purely theological, divorced from practical observation? We can't know for sure, but it's clear the health risks associated with water were a pervasive, unavoidable fact of daily life. So to recap, you're burning up, you're dying of thirst, and the most accessible source of water is probably going to fill you with stomach bugs, eye infections, or charming little flatworms that will spend the rest of your likely shortened life living inside you. Better start brewing that lukewarm, thick beer, and try not to splash too much while doing laundry near the riverbank. Good luck navigating thirst versus dysentery. This whole ancient Egypt experience stacking up nicely, isn't it? So you've miraculously avoided expiring from heat stroke or getting felled by waterborne nasties for a few hours. Thirst might have been your primary tormentor, but now your stomach starts to growl a low, unsettling rumble. Great, you're hungry. Time to grab a bite. But remember, this isn't a quick trip to the grocery store or a restaurant with guaranteed food safety standards. In ancient Egypt, getting nourishment was, you guessed it, just another way your existence could get complicated, painful, or downright deadly. The absolute bedrock of the ancient Egyptian diet was bread. Made primarily from emmer wheat or barley, depending on the era and region, bread was everything. It was calories, it was energy, and it was consumed in truly vast quantities every single day. Your social status didn't matter, you ate bread. You would likely be given bread as part of your daily ration, or maybe you grew the grain and baked it yourself. Now imagine biting into that bread. Expect it to be dense, maybe a little tough, and almost guaranteed to contain grit. Yes, sand and tiny stone fragments from the milling process were pretty much standard ingredients. Think of it as ancient fiber, with a side of eventual dental agony. More on teeth later, buckle up. The stones used for grinding the grain slowly wore down, shedding little bits that ended up in the flour and then in your bread. So every bite is literally grating on your enamel. Yum, a slightly quirky tidbit right there. Sand in your sandwich wasn't just something that happened at the beach, it was dinner. Couple the bread with your second essential staple, beer. As we covered safer to drink than water, it also provided significant calories and some vitamins from the fermented grain. It was often consumed thick and perhaps warm, definitely not the clear, bubbly lagers you might be imagining. It was more like a porridge you drank. And yes, children drank it too, though likely a weaker brew. Bread and beer, that was your core sustenance. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And probably a snack. But what about variety? Well, if you were lucky or wealthy or in the right season, you might supplement this base with some other things. Onions, garlic, leeks, beans, lentils, and lettuce were commonly grown vegetables. These could offer some vital nutrients, assuming they were properly cleaned, using potentially contaminated water and cooked. Fruits like dates, figs, grapes, and later pomegranates were enjoyed when available, usually seasonally, or if you lived near an orchard. Imagine the excitement when fig season came around, a rare sweetness without grit. Getting protein was harder for the average person. Meat was relatively scarce and expensive. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs were raised, but slaughtering one was a bigger deal. You might get small amounts on feast days or if you were high status. For many, the primary source of non-grain protein was fish from the Nile. Now we just discussed how contaminated the Nile was. So while grilled or dried fish provided necessary protein, it also came with its own risk of parasites, hello flatworms again, and whatever else the fish had ingested. Drying and salting helped preserve fish and make it safer, but salting required salt, which wasn't free. And if not dried or cooked properly, fish spoils rapidly, especially in that heat. Food poisoning wasn't a mild inconvenience back then. It could very easily be fatal or leave you severely debilitated, making you even more susceptible to everything else trying to kill you. Food storage was another major challenge, linking directly to spoilage and pest problems. Grain had to be kept dry to prevent mold. Some molds produce highly toxic aflatoxins, a very real ancient health risk, and stored away from rodents and insects. Food preparation happened without modern refrigeration or hygiene standards. You didn't wash your hands with antibacterial soap before preparing food. Cooking might involve an open fire in your dwelling, filling the air with smoke, adding another subtle layer of unhealthy exposure. Flies landed on everything. Raw food, cooked food, drying food, leftovers. This was a constant vector for spreading pathogens directly onto your plate. Consider this mainstream historical fact. Grain production, storage, and distribution were absolutely central to the Egyptian economy and state control. The pharaoh's power rested in part on his ability to ensure the Nile flooded the grain grew, and the surplus was collected in vast granaries and distributed. Bread and beer weren't just food items. They were forms of payment called rations for laborers on massive projects like pyramids or temples, and for government officials. Your salary might very well arrive in sacks of grain or jugs of beer. So, while vital, the supply chain was also open to corruption, spoilage, and control by the elite. As for potential poisons or toxins, besides mold, there's a slightly quirky tidbit about one particular fish. The pufferfish known to Egyptians contains lethal toxins in certain organs if not prepared perfectly. While probably not a common meal, it was known, and attempting to eat it could easily kill you. Just another cheerful culinary hazard of the ancient world. Stick to the gritty bread safer bet mostly. Historians still argue whether the diet of the average Egyptian, particularly farmers and laborers, was sufficiently varied year-round to prevent malnutrition or deficiencies, especially outside of harvest seasons. While core staples like bread provided carbs and some protein, access to fat, vitamins, and minerals from diverse sources was likely precarious, fluctuating, based on the flood's success, local conditions, and individual wealth, or access to rations. Were periodic famines, even minor ones, a regular feature of life? Evidence suggests they were adding starvation or nutritional deficiency to your list of worries. So let's paint the picture. You're chewing on dense, sandy bread and washing it down with thick, lukewarm beer. If you're lucky, maybe you get a gritty lentil stew or some questionable fish. Every meal carries the risk of acute food poisoning or chronic issues from parasites and groundstone. You're constantly battling hunger unless rations are ample, and those rations themselves might not provide everything you need to truly thrive. This ancient power diet isn't giving you superpowers, it's chipping away at your health one gritty bite and germ-laden drop at a time. Makes you really appreciate plastic-wrapped refrigerated leftovers, doesn't it? So, you've battled the heat, navigated the treacherous waters, and survived a few rounds with the gritty bread and possibly questionable fish. You might even be starting to feel like you're getting the hang of this whole ancient survival thing. And then a sharp, throbbing pain shoots through your jaw. Or maybe it's that dull, constant ache you've had since you first bit down on something that felt suspiciously like tiny rocks. Welcome to your dental reality in ancient Egypt. As promised, that sandy bread and sugary fruits like dates have been working their magic. Your teeth are probably a mess. Cavities almost guaranteed. Abscesses high probability. Gums that are, well, let's just say they're not happy standard issue. Ancient Egyptians, despite their many advanced achievements in other areas, had notoriously terrible dental health. This wasn't because they didn't try to clean their teeth. They did have things like chew sticks, but their diet was simply brutal on enamel. The grit from the stone grinding wheels embedded in everything constantly wore down their teeth, exposing the more sensitive pulp underneath. This led to rampant decay infections and agonizing pain. Imagine trying to eat anything hard, hot, or cold. Imagine the sleepless nights caused by a throbbing toothache with zero access to modern pain relievers, stronger than maybe a swig of that weak beer. Your ancient aspirin equivalent would be pretty much nothing you'd recognize or want to try. Forget dental floss fluoride or Novocaine. This toothache is your constant, unwelcome companion now. You feel it right in your skull. Every chew is a potential risk. Ouch is an understatement. It's more like, please just knock me out now. This brings us to ancient Egyptian medicine as a whole. When something goes seriously wrong, and with everything else happening to your body at will, you need help. Forget hospitals with sterile environments and specialized doctors. Your options are far more holistic in the scariest sense of the word. Egyptian medicine was a fascinating blend of practical, empirical knowledge. They learned some things from treating injuries and watching illnesses progress, and straight-up magic and religion. If you broke a bone, they might try to set it. If you had a surface wound, they might clean and bandage it with linen soaked in honey. Honey is surprisingly effective. These are the glimmers of sensible medical practice. However, illness wasn't just seen as a physical ailment. It was often attributed to angry gods, evil spirits, or magical curses. So, treatment involved not only remedies, but also prayers, amulets, and spells recited by a priest or a physician magician. Did your stomach hurt? Could be bad food or could be a demon munching on your intestines. The cure: a herbal concoction and an incantation to scare off the tummy monster. Your medical practitioner might be less interested in sterile instruments and more interested in the position of the stars or which god you might have recently offended. It's kind of like going to the doctor, but they also want to check your aura and ask if you've returned anything to the universe recently without thanking it. A mainstream historical fact is the existence of significant medical papyri, like the Edwin Smith papyrus and the Ebers papyrus, dating back thousands of years. The Edwin Smith papyrus is remarkable because it's essentially an ancient surgery textbook detailing the examination, diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment of specific traumatic injuries, mostly head and neck wounds. It's surprisingly empirical, often stating an ailment not to be treated if they knew they had no cure. The Ebers papyrus, on the other hand, is more like a formulary or general medical text containing a huge number of remedies for various conditions. Some rational, like using animal liver for night blindness, a condition caused by vitamin A deficiency, and liver is packed with vitamin a surprisingly effective accidental discovery, and many others. Less so. Using mashed up mouse or crocodile dung for medicinal purposes wasn't unheard of. Remember that potential crocodile dung sunscreen joke? Callback? Yeah, ancient Egyptians had a thing for animal excrement in medicine. It's not good for you. Speaking of weird remedies, here's a quirky tidbit one. Ancient Egyptian remedy for vision problems involved mixing human brain matter with honey. Yep, brain, honey, eyeball area. The thought alone makes your modern eyes water. Imagine explaining that treatment plan to a patient today. All right, sir, we're going to apply a paste made of... Never mind, just trust the ancient wisdom. The line between doctor and sorcerer was often blurred, and even skilled practitioners would likely resort to magical spells or divine appeals if empirical treatments failed, or for illnesses they didn't understand. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian physicians were true scientists performing empirical trials and surgeries based purely on observed outcomes, or if their knowledge was primarily passed down through tradition, with magic playing an equally valid role in their eyes. Were there different types of practitioners, some more rational and others more magical? Or did most incorporate both approaches? It's a complex picture. You as a patient wouldn't necessarily know what kind of treatment you'd get or how effective it might be, especially for those raging tooth infections or the lingering effects of parasitic invaders from the Nile. Pain management, as we understand it, barely existed. Infections from surgery or wounds would be common without antiseptics. Even simple broken bones could be tricky if not set correctly, leading to permanent disability. And for many illnesses, the treatment was likely worse than the disease, involving nauseating concoctions or painful procedures carried out without anesthetic. Your toothache is getting worse just thinking about it, isn't it? The sand grit has already done its job. Now comes the suffering. Maybe you'll find a physician who knows how to drain an abscess using basic and probably unsterilized tools, a procedure that would make you faint dead away without pain relief. Or maybe you'll get a poultice made of strange herbs mixed with something less than savory animal byproduct. The throbbing in your mouth now seems representative of the general precariousness of your physical health. Anything could go wrong, from the simplest cut turning gangrenous in the heat to a raging fever the ancients couldn't diagnose, to the relentless internal damage from parasites or malnutrition slowly eating away at you. And the best medical care available involves maybe prayer, maybe mouse guts, and probably a lot of hoping. Good luck getting that tooth extracted cleanly, or getting a filling. Yeah, fillings weren't a thing. Maybe just tie the aching tooth to a string and the other end to a doorknob. Except you probably don't have a doorknob. Feeling lucky yet? Each ache, each twinge, each unfamiliar internal gurgle in ancient Egypt sends a cold wave of panic through your modern coddled system. Because you know there's no popping an ibuprofen and hoping for the best. You're reliant on ancient knowledge, ancient beliefs, and perhaps a little bit of sheer stubborn, gritty willpower, which you might lose along with your tooth. Right now, maybe that relentless heat has given you a pounding headache you can't get rid of. Or perhaps your jaw is still throbbing from that toothache that's only getting worse. Maybe it's just a generalized feeling of nausea and malaise from everything your body has encountered today. And where are you trying to recover to find some respite from the sheer physical onslaught of ancient Egyptian existence? You're likely headed back to your dwelling. And your dwelling, unless you happen to be one of the vanishingly small percentage of the truly elite, is going to offer limited comfort. And yes, add to your list of historical discomforts and health risks. Your home is probably constructed from sun-dried mud brick. This is a mainstream historical fact. Mud brick mixed with straw for binding, perhaps, was the dominant building material for housing from peasant huts to quite substantial villas for the wealthy. Only temples and major monumental structures used large amounts of quarried stone. It's readily available from the Nile's bounty, relatively easy to work with, and thick walls do offer some degree of insulation against the absolute peak of the daytime heat. However, they also retain heat, meaning the dwelling stays warm well into the night, providing only limited escape from that relentless warmth we discussed earlier. Imagine crawling into bed, spoiler, probably not a bed in your sense, and the walls are radiating heat from the 12 hours the sun has been beating down on them. Lovely. Step inside. The space is probably small. Rooms might be arranged linearly, opening one into the next, or perhaps around a small, unroofed courtyard if you're slightly better off. Floors are often just compacted earth, sometimes covered with mats woven from reeds or straw. There's very little furniture. Maybe a few low stools, a small low table storage chest made of wood or woven materials, and likely simple straw mats on the floor for sleeping. No cushy mattress, no sprung sofa, no ergonomic chair. Just you, your straw mat, and the hard, dusty floor underneath. Trying to get comfortable with a throbbing tooth or aching back. Good luck finding that sweet spot on a reed mat on packed dirt. Hope you didn't mind roughing it, because you are seriously roughing it now. And the hygiene, or rather the lack of it by your standards, let's just say you quickly learned that the concept of a private indoor bathroom was centuries away from widespread implementation. There were no flushing toilets. Waste disposal typically involved chamber pots, clay pots used as toilets indoors, which would then need to be emptied somewhere, often just outside the dwelling or in a communal waste pile. Or people might simply go to designated areas further away from homes, though proximity to the river might make that tempting for some cycling our germ issue right back to the Nile. Imagine the smells lingering around habitations, particularly in the heat. Your sensitive 21st century nose is in for a rude awakening. That subtle city odor you sometimes complain about ancient Egypt smells are layered, and not pleasantly. Personal cleanliness was basic. Washing would likely involve a basin of water heated. Maybe if you had fuel and time, but often just ambient temperature and perhaps natron, a natural salt, as a sort of soap taught cleansing agent. No running hot water for a shower or a bath whenever you feel like it. A full bath would be a significant undertaking involving fetching and heating water. So, daily deep cleaning of your body was likely minimal, focusing more on extremities. This contributes to body odor, yes, but more importantly, it means germs, dirt, and potential irritants stay on your skin. Think how itchy you felt from the dust and sweat earlier. Now imagine adding several days' accumulation of grit and grime. Exfoliation via ancient neglect. Within the dwelling, the environment presents its own challenges. Dust is ever present, sifting through the roof, blowing in through door openings, no actual doors in the modern sense. Maybe just a mat or curtain coating every surface. Air quality indoors is often poor, particularly if cooking is done over an open fire inside, filling the small space with smoke. Imagine dealing with respiratory issues from sand and dust, combined with constant low-level smoke inhalation. Lung health probably isn't your long-term success story here. A slightly quirkier tidbit relates to dealing with the pests inevitably drawn to human habitation and stored food. Storing grain and other edibles indoors necessary for security meant that mice, rats, and insects like beetles and weevils were constant, unwelcome housemates. Your home wasn't just yours, it was a thriving micro-ecosystem of critters hoping to share your gritty bread. Finding evidence of rodents and insects in archaeological digs of even relatively well-off homes is common. Cats became valued less because they were cuddly pets, though some certainly were adored, and more because they were incredibly effective furry pest control units. Imagine trying to sleep soundly knowing rats might be nibbling on your stored food supply nearby, or even scuttling over your sleeping mat. Good thing ASMR doesn't usually feature ancient rodent noises. Historians still argue whether privacy was a concept that held the same value in ancient Egyptian society as it does for modern Western cultures. Homes where small activities like cooking, socializing, and sleeping often took place in relatively open shared spaces or just outside the home. Were individuals and families more used to living in close quarters with limited personal space? Or did the lack of private rooms and indoor facilities contribute to social stress and a constant desire for occasional solitude that was hard to find? Given the difficulty of getting away from others, finding moments of quiet reflection would require actively going out into the fields or the desert edge with all its other dangers. Living conditions then compound the challenges you're already facing. You don't have a comfortable, clean, private space to retreat to. Your home is dusty, warm, lacks proper sanitation, and is shared with vermin. The simple act of existing within these walls adds stress to your body and mind. Your modern expectations of cleanliness, privacy, and basic comfort are constantly violated. No cool, quiet bedroom for recovery. Just a small, potentially stuffy, likely smelly, rodent-infested box made of dirt, offering minimal barrier against the sun and heat it absorbed all day, and almost no protection from the microscopic invaders waiting to feast on your internal organs, or the visible ones eyeing your dinner and sharing your sleeping space. Sweet dreams. More like sticky, itchy, slightly anxious, rodent-aware nap. Okay, so you're trying to catch your breath in your little mud brick box, maybe hoping that just hiding from the sun will solve your problems. You're dusty, uncomfortable, and maybe starting to realize that lying around isn't really an option because nobody in ancient Egypt is getting rich by just existing. If you want to eat, if you want your share of that gritty bread and questionable beer, you're going to have to work. And work in ancient Egypt wasn't the kind of sitting at a desk under fluorescent lights work you're used to. Oh no, it was labor. Hard physical, relentless toil under that same scorching sun day after exhausting day. Imagine the sheer brute force needed to make anything happen in this world. Want to farm. You're out in the fields after the Nile flood recedes knee-deep in thick, silty mud, often guiding oxen pulling a simple wooden plow that barely scratches the surface. You're scattering seeds by hand, likely stooped over for hours on end. Then comes the irrigation directing precious water channels, often digging and maintaining them yourself with simple hose and baskets. Harvesting involves sickles and hours bent double under the sun, bundling heavy stalks. Threshing grain involves beating it to separate the edible part from the stalk, often using animals trampling over it or by hand, with flails kicking up immense clouds of choking dust and chaff. All of this is done with basic tools, minimal mechanical advantage, and relying entirely on muscle and sweat. Your pampered modern hands and uncalloused souls would last maybe an hour before blistering and protesting vehemently. Say goodbye to that gentle stretching routine before your desk job. Your new warm-up involves just surviving the walk to the field in the morning heat. Perhaps you're not an agricultural worker. Maybe you've been conscripted for a state project. Something truly massive and seemingly impossible like quarrying stone or building a temple or, yes, a pyramid. This is where backbreaking isn't a metaphor, it's a literal occupational hazard. Picture yourself hauling heavy stones or bundles of reeds or clay or wood. There are no forklifts, no cranes powered by electricity, nothing but human and sometimes animal power levers and ropes. You're part of a team pulling, pushing, and lifting weights that feel impossible. Think about those monumental blocks in the pyramids. Even the small ones are heavy, and someone had to get them out of the quarry, transport them often miles, maybe on boats, then dragged across land and muscle them into place. Your back would scream, your shoulders would ache constantly, your hands would be perpetually calloused and probably bleeding from scrapes. Repetitive strain injury isn't a disability you claim benefits for. It's just Tuesday. This demanding physical labor wasn't just hard, it was dangerous. Accidents were frequent. Dropping a heavy stone on your foot shattered instantly. A misplaced swing of a hand axe while working wood could lose a finger. Getting kicked or trampled by an animal you're working with, life-threatening. Even smaller things like cuts and scrapes become dangerous in the dusty, unhygienic environment. Hello again, infection. You're probably covered in minor injuries, all carrying the potential for a major health crisis without access to antiseptics or antibiotics. That ache in your lower back after just sitting incorrectly for too long in your comfortable chair. Here it's a chronic condition you develop by your mid-20s, from hauling stones or bending in the fields. Examination of ancient skeletons confirms rampant signs of arthritis, particularly in the spine and knees, clear evidence of the brutal physical stress put on their bodies from a young age. A huge mainstream historical fact here is the organization of labor for those massive state-building projects. While there were some skilled craftsmen and overseers, the bulk of the workforce consisted of ordinary Egyptians, conscripted during the agricultural off-season, when the Nile inundation made farming impossible or required as a form of tax duty. This wasn't necessarily unpaid slave labor in the typical Roman sense, though conditions were certainly harsh and participation compulsory. Workers were often housed fed that guaranteed gritty bread and beer, and organized into divisions and gangs with names. They had identities and structures. This wasn't chaotic forced labor. It was a highly organized mobilization of human power on an epic scale, which is perhaps slightly comforting. Maybe less comforting, highly organized, just means more efficient at working you into the ground, alongside hundreds of others. Misery loves company, but maybe not that much company for that long doing that kind of lifting. Beyond farming and construction, daily life demanded significant physical effort. Fetching water from the Nile or a canal could involve a considerable walk while carrying heavy jars. Milling grain at home with hand querns was arduous, time-consuming work. Laundry involved kneeling by the water's edge, pounding and rubbing tough linen cloth by hand. Preparing food, making pottery, weaving textiles. Nearly everything was a manual process requiring significant energy and repetitive motions. Your concept of a task likely involves a machine or appliance. Theirs involved hands, sweat, and muscles. Here's a slightly quirky tidbit related to this toil. There's evidence of specific work songs used by laborers to coordinate their efforts while pulling heavy objects or rowing boats. Imagine a rhythmic chant helping synchronization for a huge team hauling a statue or an obelisk. It might have provided a brief morale boost, a sense of shared purpose and practical timing for maximum force, but it certainly didn't make the incredibly difficult job easy or prevent hernias. Historians still argue about the daily schedule and expectations for average laborers. Were they working sunup to sundown consistently? Did they have periods of rest or days off besides major festivals? While the archaeological record and texts show intense periods of work, for specific projects like during the conscription for construction, the rhythm of life for farmers was dictated by the Nile's cycles and seasonal needs, which were incredibly demanding during peak seasons like planting and harvest, but perhaps slightly less so at other times. Were the periods of rest sufficient to recover from the physical strain? Or did wear and tear simply accumulate relentlessly? It's likely wear and tear won in the end for many. So you're not only baking in the sun, drinking germ water, eating gritty food, and living in a dusty mud box with bad teeth. You're also expected to spend most of your waking hours engaged in brutally hard, potentially disabling manual labor. There's no weekend, no vacation time, unless the flood season truly makes fieldwork impossible, and you're not drafted for building no sick leave, unless you are literally collapsing, and probably not even comfortable clothes that don't chafe after hours of sweat and movement. That aching back, those blistered hands, the pervasive fatigue, that's not a temporary setback. It's your new normal. The idea of an easy day is a modern fantasy. Every single day requires a deep reservoir of physical and mental toughness just to perform the basic tasks necessary for survival. And remember that dodgy food and water and bad teeth. They're actively undermining your strength while you're trying to work this hard. This survival challenge just added extreme physical exhaustion and likelihood of chronic injury to your list. Good luck moving that heavy rock, or even just walking to the toilet spot later. Oof. Okay, your muscles are screaming from hauling, bending, or threshing your back, is protesting loudly, and that perpetual ache in your mouth reminds you every moment is a gritty reality. But it's not just the physical environment and demanding labor that will make your ancient Egyptian experience difficult to impossible. It's also navigating the intricate, unforgiving web of ancient Egyptian society and its rules. As a complete outsider with no connections and zero understanding of the local customs and power structures, you are incredibly vulnerable. This society is highly stratified with a very clear pecking order, and stepping out of line even accidentally could have severe consequences. At the absolute top is the pharaoh, a divine ruler literally considered a god on earth whose word is law. Beneath the pharaoh are high priests, viziers, and a privileged class of scribes officials, and nobles who managed the country administered justice, collected taxes, often in grain or labor. Remember and lived lives of relative luxury compared to the masses. Below them are skilled craftsmen, merchants, soldiers, and then the vast majority of the population farmers and manual laborers who formed the base that supported the entire structure. Slaves also existed captured in warfare or sometimes acquired through debt or judicial punishment, occupying the very bottom rung. Where do you fit in? Unless you arrive with immense wealth somehow, or a specialized skill the Egyptians desperately need, and they were highly skilled already, you are firmly at the bottom. You're likely just another anonymous laborer, or perhaps someone scraping by with whatever meager, low-status work you can find. This means you have virtually no rights, no voice, and limited protection under the law compared to anyone even slightly higher up the ladder. Your opinions about management on the pyramid construction site, irrelevant. Your request for better working conditions, laughed out of existence if you even dared to make it. Life isn't about individual rights or upward mobility based purely on merit. It's about your place in the established cosmic and social order, an order divinely ordained and rigorously enforced. This brings us to the legal system. Ancient Egypt did have laws and courts aiming for mayat, a concept embodying truth, justice, order, balance, and harmony. Judges were officials, sometimes priests, and legal disputes were recorded on papyrus, yea, for scribes. Common disputes might involve land ownership, inheritance, or debt. Criminal matters could range from theft and assault to far more serious crimes. Evidence was presented, testimony heard sometimes under duress if torture was employed and judgments were rendered. However, the system was far from egalitarian by modern standards. Influence, status, and bribery almost certainly played a role, though official texts lauded impartial justice. If you had wronged someone of higher status, your situation was far more precarious. Punishment could be swift and brutal. Petty theft might result in flogging, mutilation. Cutting off hands or noses was known, or even forced labor in harsh mines or quarries. Effectively a death sentence given the conditions. More serious crimes could lead to execution by drowning, burning, or impalement. Think about trying to navigate that legal landscape without even knowing the specific laws or social norms, or having any form of legal counsel beyond hoping for a kind official or sympathetic god. Accidentally taking something that belonged to someone with connections could lead to a punishment wildly disproportionate to what you'd expect in the modern world. That unintentional bump into a minor official in the marketplace might escalate into a huge problem for you very fast. A mainstream historical fact is the role of the local council or assembly of elders, often called a jadjat, or similar, in mediating disputes in villages and towns. This was where everyday conflicts might be resolved locally based on community custom and practicality as much as formal written law. You might plead your case here, but success would likely depend on your social standing, reputation, and perhaps finding someone willing to speak on your behalf. Access to this level of justice would be your best bet, but still, you'd be vulnerable. Imagine a minor dispute erupts because you unknowingly took water from a canal segment. Someone else claimed rights to remember that crucial, life-giving, dangerous water. In modern life, maybe a civil court summons or an irritated neighbor. in ancient Egypt could escalate rapidly and without property deeds or formal recognition. Your claims would hold little weight against an established resident, and you certainly wouldn't have money for legal representation. Not that such a thing truly existed for the likes of you anyway. Your best legal strategy is probably invisibility and avoiding any interaction that could possibly lead to conflict. Don't own anything valuable not hard in your situation. Don't make friends with enemies of powerful people. And definitely don't speak ill of the pharaoh. Easy, right? Here's a slightly quirky tidbit about dispute resolution. Sometimes disputes were settled using divine oracles. Questions could be put to statues of gods carried in procession by priests. The god's answer, interpreted through movements or pauses of the statue by the priests, perhaps reflecting the popular will or priestly agenda, would determine guilt or innocence. So your fate might literally rest on priestly interpretation of a wobble from a god statue. No pressure? This blending of religion and justice was completely normal here. Historians still argue about the true fairness and accessibility of the legal system for the average person. While official texts portray the pharaoh as dispensing justice for the poor and powerless, the reality was likely complex with corruption and bias, often overriding the ideals of Mayat. Were the local councils truly equitable, or were they dominated by local strongmen? Was it genuinely possible for a peasant to gain justice against a wealthy landowner? Evidence suggests it was challenging at best. So, your presence as an unknown, propertyless outsider automatically places you near the bottom of a rigid social pyramid. Your rights are minimal, your voice unheard, and the system of law and order, while existing, can be arbitrary bias towards the elite and deliver punishments that are horrifyingly severe for relatively minor transgressions by modern standards. Combine your physical vulnerabilities with social and legal powerlessness, and simply existing without accidentally offending the wrong person or being in the wrong place at the wrong time becomes incredibly difficult. The slightest misstep, perceived disrespect, or accidental involvement in a conflict could move you from struggling survivor to brutalized criminal or permanent forced laborer in a heartbeat. Staying inconspicuous feels like the only sensible social strategy, but how long can you truly manage that in this intense shared world? Your personal freedom and safety depend entirely on navigating these invisible and very sharp social edges. Just try not to sneeze too loudly near a temple. You never know who might consider that a bad omen. You've navigated the blistering heat, survived a potential bout of ancient dysentery, dealt with gritty bread and painful teeth, endured backbreaking labor, and somehow managed not to get yourself publicly flogged for accidentally looking at someone important sideways. Good job, you've cleared a few hurdles. Now, just as you might be getting slightly complacent, remember that you're sharing this ancient landscape with quite a few residents who weren't interested in ma'at or social hierarchy. I'm talking about the wildlife. And much of the wildlife in ancient Egypt was very much not interested in being your friend. While we tend to picture pharaohs, pyramids, and fertile fields, most of ancient Egypt was uninhabitable desert. But even the life-sustaining Nile Valley and its fringes were home to numerous creatures that could ruin your day, week, or simply end your life without a moment's notice. Foremost among these, of course, were the creatures dwelling in that river we talked about, the Nile crocodile. Think about that urgently needed drink you wanted to take from the riverbank back in Section 2. Now picture large, scaly jaws erupting from the murky water with terrifying speed and force. Crocodile attacks on humans and livestock were a very real and constant danger. Trying to fetch water doing laundry by the river's edge, fishing crossing a smaller channel, or simply losing your footing near the bank could very easily result in becoming crocodile dinner. They were powerful, stealthy predators well adapted to ambushing prey. The reverence and fear associated with the god Sobek, depicted as a crocodile or crocodile-headed man, makes absolute sense when you live side by side with these formidable beasts, who were a daily reminder of the wild, unpredictable forces of nature on the very edge of civilization. You needed the river, but going near it always carried this significant, terrifying risk. Trying to casually dangle your feet in the cool water on a hot day? Not a good idea. At all. Beyond the obvious big, scaly dangers, smaller threats were ubiquitous. Snakes. Many varieties, including venomous ones, were present in the fields along pathways near water sources, and even in and around dwellings seeking rodents or shade. Stepping on one accidentally while walking barefoot common, or reaching into a storage pot could be fatal. Imagine the sheer terror of a snake bite far from any potential, though limited medical help, knowing that death could follow within hours and your only recourse might be shouting a desperate prayer, or trying an ancient, probably useless antidote. Just trying to walk across your dusty courtyard at night suddenly becomes an exercise in careful shuffling and heightened anxiety. Scorpions were another constant menace, especially in rocky areas or within poorly sealed mud brick walls where they might seek shelter from the sun. Their stings, while not always lethal, were excruciatingly painful and could cause severe illness, particularly dangerous for children or those already weakened by other ailments. Reaching for a sandal you left outside overnight, picking up a piece of firewood, or just brushing against a wall could result in a nasty surprise and intense localized agony. Another reminder that even seemingly safe spaces weren't free of threat. Oh, remember the bit about sleeping on rooftops? Just saying scorpions liked roofs too. Pleasant dreams. Large, powerful animals, though perhaps less common in the immediate vicinity of crowded villages than reptiles and insects, could still pose a problem. Hippos, surprisingly aggressive and territorial, were present in the Nile in ancient times, and were incredibly dangerous if encountered, especially by fishermen in small boats. Trying to net fish or simply crossing the river, you had to watch out not just for the crocs below, but potentially for an angry hippo surfacing violently beside you. Lions were found on the fringes of the desert, though likely becoming rarer near populated areas in later periods. Hyenas and other large carnivores might occasionally prey on livestock or scavenge near settlements. Insects were everywhere and generally less likely to directly kill you, with exceptions like venomous spiders, though those were less emphasized threats compared to snakes such as scorpions. But think about the sheer numbers. Swarms of flies and mosquitoes weren't just annoying, they were carriers of disease. From those rampant eye infections we discussed earlier to potentially malaria or other mosquito-borne illnesses, although evidence for the prevalence of malaria specifically is complex and debated among scholars. Lacking mosquito nets or repellents, you'd be constantly bitten itchy and exposed to whatever pathogens these insects carried. That persistent buzzing in your ear, it could literally make you sick. A mainstream historical fact. Underpinning this animal danger is the development of hunting as a prestigious activity, and even a necessary form of protection or pest control, particularly by the elite. Relief carvings and texts depict pharaohs and nobles, hunting lions, hippos, and crocodiles, activities that showcase their power and ability to conquer the forces of chaos and protect the order of Mayat from wild threats. For ordinary people, hunting would have been more about subsistence or protecting their village and crops. Think of having to constantly guard your chickens from foxes or monitor the fields for dangerous animals venturing too close. It wasn't just nature is pretty. It was nature is actively trying to eat my goat or worse me. Nice? Here's a slightly quirky tidbit. Some smaller animals that seem innocuous to us today were deeply feared or viewed with suspicion in ancient Egypt, possibly due to their association with chaos or dangerous deities, or perhaps just based on observed behavior. For example, some types of beetles or even small reptiles were viewed with wariness, beyond what a modern person might understand, linked perhaps to their appearance in funerary contexts or myths about underworld demons. Your modern mild aversion to a spider might translate to ancient panic if you encounter certain types of insects that held negative symbolic weight. Historians still argue about the impact that the natural environment and its dangerous wildlife had on the average ancient Egyptian's psychology and worldview. Did the constant proximity to potentially deadly creatures shape their religious beliefs, making them more reverent of certain animal-headed gods or more focused on maintaining cosmic order? Mayat as a way of keeping chaos embodied by wild nature at bay. Or were these threats simply an accepted practical part of life to be dealt with through vigilance and pragmatic action? influencing daily behavior more than deep philosophical beliefs. We can't definitively know the inner experience, but it's clear the external reality was one where animal encounters weren't just a rare incident. They were part of the everyday risk profile. So, you've dragged your weary, possibly aching body back to your dwelling, having faced heat germs, grit, pain, manual labor, and social anxiety. Are you safe yet? Not really. There might be a scorpion in your sandal, a snake under your mat flies landing on your dinner, or the sound of something potentially large and dangerous lurking just beyond the light of your lamp. Every shadow could conceal a threat. Every step, even inside or nearby, carries the risk of a venomous bite or sting. The sheer physical effort required for work is compounded by the mental burden of constant vigilance against the non-human residents of this ancient land. Just try to relax and not think about things with too many legs, too many teeth, or too much venom. All right, that itch you feel could be dust or could be a beetle getting too close. Sleep well. Okay, you're feeling the cumulative effects of surviving ancient Egypt. You're likely bruised, aching, itchy, probably haven't had a decent night's sleep or a clean meal, and everything hurts just a little bit, or maybe a lot. But staying alive physically isn't the only challenge. You also need to navigate the complex and pervasive belief system and cultural rules of this society. Your modern, perhaps secular or religiously diverse perspective isn't just irrelevant here. Misunderstanding or disrespecting ancient Egyptian religion and customs could make you a social outcast at best or put you in grave danger of offending powerful forces, either human priest pharaoh or divine the gods themselves at worst. Religion was absolutely central to every aspect of life in ancient Egypt, from the cosmic order to daily routine. There wasn't a separation between sacred and secular. Everything was interconnected. The universe was populated by a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses, many depicted with animal or composite forms, who governed everything from the sunrise Ra or Khepri and the Nile flood, Hapi, to specific crafts Ptah for craftsmen and concepts like truth and justice Ma'at. You needed to understand which god was responsible for what, how to properly venerate them, and what behavior would please or displease them. And there were many gods with local variations and evolving importance over thousands of years. Keeping track of who's who and what they like would be a significant undertaking for your modern brain. You would be expected to respect religious festivals and practices. Participation might involve processions bringing offerings to temples or observing specific taboos associated with certain gods or times. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were economic powerhouses and administrative centers run by powerful priesthoods. Offending a priest or disrespecting temple property would be incredibly foolish, bringing down significant wrath. Walking unknowingly into a sacred area you weren't supposed to access could have dire consequences. Eating a food item forbidden on a particular day dedicated to a specific deity might feel insignificant to you, but to others, it could show a dangerous lack of respect for the divine order. Burial practices were profoundly important, stemming from the elaborate beliefs about the afterlife. Egyptians went to incredible lengths to prepare for death, including mummification for those who could afford it. Building tombs and filling them with goods and spells, from texts like the Book of the Dead, to aid the deceased in their journey through the underworld and ensure continued existence in the afterlife. Neglecting proper burial rituals or disturbing a tomb was considered a horrifying sacrilege. Just imagine you stumble upon an ancient tomb. Easy enough, they're everywhere in this part of the world out of modern curiosity. Your modern impulse might be archaeological find. Their ancient belief, do not disturb the resting place and vital equipment of a soul's eternal journey. You will bring a curse. Yes, the idea of curses associated with tombs was very real to them. Trying to explain that you're a harmless modern tourist just wanting to look might not fly. Suddenly you're a grave robber and spiritual polluter in their eyes. Yikes. Beyond grand religious beliefs, there were countless superstitions and smaller cultural rules dictating daily life. Which foot to step out of bed with, which omens were good or bad, specific gestures or phrases to use or avoid when interacting with others, or appealing to higher authority. Everything from dreams to animal behavior could be interpreted for its significance. You, completely ignorant of these nuances, would be constantly at risk of accidentally violating a taboo or sending an unintended negative signal. Is pointing considered rude? What about making direct eye contact with someone significantly higher status? Is this particular bird noise good or bad? You'd have no idea. Your ancient Egyptian counterparts would be reading all sorts of meaning into your clueless modern behavior, likely none of it favorable. A mainstream historical fact about ancient Egyptian belief is the concept of Ba and Ka, different aspects of the soul or spirit. The Ka was the life force, the spiritual double-born with you. The Ba was the personality or essence able to leave the tomb after death and travel. The Ak was the transfigured spirit joining the gods and living eternally. Maintaining these elements through proper burial and ongoing offerings in the tomb chapel was essential for eternal survival. This explains why preserving the body and providing resources for the Ka and Ba were such significant preoccupations and expenses. Death wasn't the end. It was a transformation that required significant planning and support from the living. Here's a slightly quirky tidbit. Scarab beetles were highly significant symbols associated with rebirth and the sun god Khepri, because they were observed rolling balls of dung, ancient interpretation, pushing the sun across the sky, and emerging from the ground, ancient interpretation, spontaneous creation. Amulets in the shape of scarabs were common, worn for protection and good fortune in life and placed on mummies for rebirth in the afterlife. You might find one and think, oh, a cool ancient beetle carving. They would think, that's a powerful symbol of life and resurrection, be respectful. Maimonas wearing one incorrectly, or heaven forbid, accidentally stepping on one considered sacred, could be seen as deeply disrespectful. Historians still argue about the extent to which the average Egyptian truly understood or internalized the complex theological doctrines developed by the priesthood and elite, while everyone participated in festivals and knew the major gods. Did they grasp the nuances of the underworld journey, or the relationship between various deities? Or was their religion more practical, focused on daily appeals to local gods, or ensuring the afterlife through pragmatic actions like securing a tomb plot and mummification materials if possible? Your ability to fit in would probably rely more on adhering to visible rituals and social norms than mastering deep theology, but you wouldn't even know the rituals. So in addition to everything else, you must navigate a society deeply imbued with religious belief and cultural customs you know nothing about. Every action from your posture to how you interact with animals to where you step could be interpreted through a spiritual lens you don't comprehend. Accidentally offending a deity, disrupting a ritual, or showing disrespect for sacred concepts could alienate you entirely or invite disaster, up from your neighbor's scorn to potential divine wrath. This ancient world doesn't just challenge your body, it challenges your very way of thinking and being. Trying to live authentically as a modern person while respecting a belief system, this foreign and pervasive feels like walking through a minefield, blindfolded with every potential misstep, carrying spiritual as well as social peril. Just don't pet that ibis bird near the temple unless you are absolutely sure it's okay. Some animals were sacred, and harming one, even accidentally, was a serious offense. Yes, harming an animal could be a worse offense than harming a human if the animal was sacred. Welcome to another level of baffling ancient priorities. You've made it this far. Through the frying heat and the perpetual thirst through the murky depths, teeming with illness and hungry reptiles past the sandy bread, and precarious meals enduring the persistent agony of untreated dental woes, and the risk of ancient medical cures surviving cramped, dusty, and pest-ridden housing, pushing your aching body through back-breaking labor while avoiding fatal workplace accidents, navigating a rigid social structure with its brutal legal system, and somehow avoiding accidentally offending a god or stepping on a sacred beetle. A full day, so to speak, in ancient Egypt. And let's be honest, the cumulative experience, the sheer exhaustion, pain, and stress means your odds of waking up for a second day and enduring it all again are, well, they aren't looking great, are they? Let's take a moment now that we've walked through just some of the many challenges and truly consider the phrase, you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. Is it strictly true? Could a modern person with perhaps extraordinary luck and adaptability physically survive one 24-hour cycle without literally dying? Maybe perhaps if they found water immediately and it was miraculously clean, or they knew how to find beer instantly stumbled into shade that happened to be safe from dangers found edible if gritty food without getting sick. Avoided any physical exertion, had no need for medical attention. Managed to be entirely invisible socially and legally, and weren't targeted by any wildlife or pests. That's a lot of conditions that are highly unlikely to all be met. Your body built for a world of comfort and sterile predictability would be screaming in protest from the moment you arrived. The accumulated stress on your system from even a single day, the heat, the dehydration, the unfamiliar and likely contaminated food, the lack of sleep, the physical strain, the constant low-level anxiety from environmental and social threats, would be immense. Modern humans simply do not have the physical conditioning, the immune system exposure history, or the innate behavioral knowledge to thrive or even just survive comfortably in that environment for long. Our resilience is built around battling different kinds of threats. Threats ancient Egyptians wouldn't comprehend, sitting too much processed food issues. Their resilience was honed over millennia to cope with this harsh, immediate reality. Recall the heat, that first and most fundamental challenge. Within hours, if not minutes, you'd be exhibiting signs of heat stress. Your risk of heat stroke without knowing exactly what to do, when to stop, and having access to ample safe fluids is incredibly high. Your core body temperature would rise dangerously. Even if you avoided death, you could suffer permanent organ damage. Remember that struggle to simply breathe in the hot, dry air. That's day-long reality. Remember the water thirst would be a constant companion. Every sip of potentially contaminated water is a roll of the dice with pathogens your immune system has never encountered at that concentration. Your modern body has built defenses against different strains of bacteria and viruses, often through vaccination and childhood illnesses in relatively clean environments. The ancient Egyptian microbial landscape is fundamentally different, and you'd be a completely unprotected tourist in a germ war. Those parasites waiting for you just to dip your toe in, and the food, gritty bread damaging your teeth, isn't a fun anecdote. It's literal physical decay from the moment you start eating, and the risk of serious food poisoning from improperly stored or prepared ingredients. Your modern stomach wouldn't be ready. Chronic dental pain alone is enough to make life miserable and can easily lead to dangerous infection spreading. Then pile on the labor, that brutal physical exertion your body is not conditioned for. Muscle failure strains, sprains, potential fractures from dropped weights, or falls are real possibilities, each one a serious health crisis without proper treatment. Imagine attempting to lift heavy stone blocks for hours without having done any physical work more strenuous than lifting your shopping bags. Your back would give out almost immediately. Think of the home life. Dust pests, lack of sanitation. Trying to sleep while scratching mosquito bites, listening to rodents scurry, and worrying about scorpions feels less like rest and more like low-grade torture. Your lack of knowledge about simple things like where exactly to go to the bathroom to avoid contaminating the area would be a problem for yourself and others. Finally, consider the constant psychological pressure. Navigating social cues you don't understand. Terrified of legal repercussions you can't predict for actions. You don't even realize are offenses, trying to show proper respect for a complex religious system you've only read about in simplified accounts. Constantly vigilant against animal threats lurking around every corner. This level of stress is mentally debilitating. Your anxiety would be through the roof. The simple act of speaking or moving could feel fraught with hidden dangers. You'd be constantly on edge, isolated by your ignorance and vulnerability. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians experienced chronic stress and anxiety on a scale comparable to modern people, albeit caused by different factors. Were they more accepting of hardship and death as part of life's natural rhythm? Or did the constant threats to their well-being and the demands of their environment weigh on them psychologically, just as such factors would affect us? Without direct accounts of inner emotional lives from ordinary people, it's hard to say for sure, but it's difficult to imagine the sheer grind and constant threat not taking a significant mental toll, let alone for an outsider ill equipped to handle it. So, summing it up, your modern body is unprepared for the climate, the diseases, the food, the lack of health care, the physical demands. Your modern mind is unprepared for the social structures, the legal system, the belief system, and the constant need for vigilance against external threats. Your immune system is a rookie in this microbial environment. Every comfort and safety net you take for granted simply doesn't exist. Even surviving one day without serious, perhaps irreversible damage or a fatal encounter would require a degree of luck so immense it's borderline fantasy. The truth is, yes, you probably wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt as your modern self. You'd be overwhelmed by the heat, incapacitated by illness or injury, or potentially run afoul of dangers you couldn't even perceive coming. It paints a stark picture of how profoundly different their reality was from ours and how soft and vulnerable our modern lives, for all their unique stresses, have made us to the raw, unadulterated challenges of the ancient world. Well, that's a lot to take in, isn't it? The reality of life on the banks of the ancient Nile wasn't the glamorous, golden, peaceful existence we sometimes see in stylized depictions. It was hard, it was dangerous, and it demanded a level of physical and mental resilience that we, with our climate controlled air clean water, from a tap guaranteed safe food, instant medical access, and layers of legal and social protection simply do not possess.